Dr. Bonham's case. Back in 1518, some physicians got together and they decided that it was a little bit too hard to practice medicine in the area of London, England, because of all the competition. And they also had some legitimate concerns about all these sort of fraudsters and quacks that were coming around, and they were acting like they were doctors, and really all they were doing was selling snake oil. So they went to the king, and they said, we'd like to form a college of physicians, and the king gave them a charter to do so. Now later this charter was also approved by Parliament through an act of Parliament, and they became the Royal College of Physicians. We're going to call them the RCP from now on in this video. Now, again, there were two things that they were trying to do. One was to stifle competition, and they did that by saying there could be 24 fellows in the Royal College of Physicians, and that's it. If you wanted to practice medicine in London, you applied with them, and you had to wait until one of those 24 died or stopped practicing medicine or quit or whatever. Then if you were first in line, you could practice medicine now as part of the RCP. The other part of the RCP was more legitimate. It was to shut down quackery and snake oil and all that kind of thing. Now, along comes Dr. Bonham, who graduated with a medical degree from Cambridge. And he decided that he was not going to deal with this RCP because he had applied and it looked like it was going to be forever before he could practice medicine in London. So he just went ahead and opened up his own shop and started practicing medicine. Now, no one ever said he practiced badly. He wasn't a quack. He was the real thing. But along comes the RCP and tries to shut him down because he's practicing without a license. So they bring him before the Royal College of Physicians. The charter allows the Royal College of Physicians to fine people who practice medicine without a license from the RCP, and so they fined him 100 shillings. Well, he told the RCP where to go. He said, I'm not paying 100 shillings, number one, and number two, when I go back home, I'm going to go back to my shop and start practicing medicine again. Well, they put him in jail. After he got out of jail, what he did was he sued several members of the Royal College of Physicians for wrongful imprisonment, false imprisonment, basically. And his claim, his case, ended up before Judge Cook. Now, when you see it in print, it looks like Judge Coke or Lord Coke. Sir Edward Coke, and it is pronounced Cook, was a jurist of the English Court of Common Pleas, and he got Dr. Bonham's case, and he ruled in Dr. Bonham's favor on the issue of whether or not Dr. Bonham was falsely imprisoned. And there were 5 rationales for his decision, but we're only going to deal with the first 2. The first rationale isn't really all that important except for the fact that it existed. And I'll tell you why that's important in a second. The first rationale was that the 2 powers that the RCP had were separate. One was the power to force people to be licensed before they could practice, and for that they could be fined if they didn't get licensed. But the second power was separate. The second power was to stop quacks and fraudsters and people who were malpracticing and killing people, and for that you could jail people. Well, no one had ever alleged that Dr. Bonham was a quack or a fraud. He was a perfectly legitimate doctor with a degree from Cambridge, and nobody had any complaints against him. The only people that had any complaints against him were the RCP. And so Judge Cook said, sorry, RCP, you can't imprison him because your only power to imprison is if he's a quack. But he's not a quack. So you falsely imprisoned him. Now, that's not important, though. Well, it was important to Mr. Bonham, Dr. Bonham. But what's important was that he went on to give a second reason. That second reason is what's important about this case. The second reason was that Lord Cook said, wait a minute, here we have a statute from Parliament which makes the RCP, the judge, the prosecutor, and a party, all in the same case. How are they a party? Because the statute said that when they impose a fine, they get a moiety of the fine. Now, what's a moiety? Moiety means half. They get half the fines. So here they stand to profit, and they're the prosecutor, and they're the judge. And according to Lord Coke, that violates the common law rights of Englishmen. And then here's the kicker, he said. Any statute which violates the common law rights of Englishmen is void. It's invalid. It will not be enforced. And therefore, he was wrongfully imprisoned. Now, why give the first reason and then move on to the second? The first reason is important because he moved on to the second. Think about it. He could have just said, we got two separate powers here, and one allows imprisonment, one doesn't. Case closed. Let's go play golf. But he didn't do that. He went on. He went on and took a sharp stick, dipped it in mud, and stuck it right in the eye of Parliament, saying, your law sucks, and here's why. It violates the common law rights of Englishmen. And the common law rights of Englishmen is typically regarded as the English Constitution. Now, that law, or I should say that decision, sort of faded from importance in England. This was a time when the Parliament and the King were scrabbling over who had the rights and powers to impose what laws, and eventually the Parliament won out and the King got to basically have no power, and the Parliament had all the power. And since then, English decisions have basically repudiated Dr. Bonham's case and that ruling in it. But in the colonies, where people were not liking these laws that were being passed by a parliament in which they had no representation, and which they felt were in violation of the common law rights of Englishmen, boy, in the colonies, that was music to the colonist ears. So when the Stamp Act was passed and the Intolerable Acts were passed, and all these acts and things that the British government was doing to the British subjects in North America, they loved to turn to Dr. Bonham's case and quote it and say, this is a law that is contrary to the common law rights of Englishmen, and therefore it cannot be enforced, it is void, it is invalid. So that's why this case was important to the colonists. But then it becomes even more important because you can look all throughout English and American jurisprudence, and this is the first case that established judicial review, where a court came in and said, I can find an act of a legislature invalid.